Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of continuing Resolution H.R. 6363. But for my discussing the CR, I want to explain our process. At the beginning of Congress, House Republicans said they would change what Washington works. Today, we have sent 7 appropriations bills totaling 75% of government funding. The Senate has passed 3 of its bills totaling $17,000. We still have a lot more work to do to get full-year bills enacted into law. That's why I support the Speaker's reasonable plan to continue government funding into early next year. It buys us time to agree on a top-line funding level and negotiate final bills with the Senate. More importantly, this plan will allow us to avoid harmful government shutdowns during the holidays, prevent a last-minute omnibus, and allow us to discuss supplemental funding separately from full-year spending. An accounting resolution is not ideal, but is more needed at this time. I thank the Speaker for choosing this very practical plan while we work out our political differences, and I urge my colleagues to support this CR, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves, and the gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Republican majority needs Democratic votes to govern. We are considering this bill under suspension of the rules because House Republicans could not agree to pass a rule on a bill to keep the government open and operating on behalf of the American people. Can't do it. Says something very poignant about the ability to govern and the willingness to govern. This continuing resolution is flawed. Critically, it does nothing to help our allies. It does not include any emergency assistance for Israel, for Ukraine, for our Indo-Pacific partners, for humanitarian aid, for childcare, or for disaster victims here at home. At a time when the Departments of State and Defense need to be able to quickly respond to global crises, House Republicans would put our diplomats, our war fighters, under outdated funding levels into February for more than 1/3 of the fiscal year. Not only is it irresponsible to kick the can down the road for several months, but it is really a waste of taxpayer dollars, folks who pride themselves on wanting to save taxpayers' dollars. This proposal also shortchanges the Women, Infants, and Children program, the WIC program. As a result of increased participation rates, the administration requested an additional $405 million to ensure that we can meet the demand for nutrition programs. The House Republican proposal includes no additional funds and will require states to halt enrollment or scale back benefits, women, infants, children. A continuing resolution is a bridge to a final agreement. It should be judged on how it helps facilitate our goal, which is to update the spending levels for full-year bills and the full-year bill for 2024. A so-called, quote, laddered bill makes it harder to reach a final agreement. Why? It doubles the likelihood of future shutdowns. And in a time of global crisis, we should promote stability and not chaos. Ultimately, we are here because House Republicans again broke the June budget agreement. They overwhelmingly supported it. It was signed into law by the president. It established a top line, the amount of money that could be translated into the dollar amount to each one of the appropriations subcommittees. Let's make it simple. There's a number that we agreed to, then you take that number, it gets broken up into pieces, and that's the majority's responsibility. I took that responsibility last December and the prior year of dealing with the allocation to each one of the 12 appropriations subcommittees. They then proceeded to waste the entire 6 weeks of the current stopgap bill, overthrowing their own speaker and pushing partisan spending measures that take us further from a final agreement. Congress must avoid a shutdown. Just one point before I say that. I think it's so interesting that we are discussing this continuing resolution, but at the same time, and I happen to be managing both bills, that the labor HHS, the education bill, is on the floor when we are going through a marathon of 146 amendments, the same path we were on for the last several weeks, where 2 bills had to be pulled from the floor because there weren't the votes to pass them. So I don't know if there are the votes to pass the Labor H bill this afternoon or this evening or tomorrow morning. I just don't know. But it's the same path that we're on. Nothing is changed in looking at a continuing resolution that makes an additional proposal. Again, Congress must avoid a shutdown. That's our responsibility. Very aware of that. But we must find a path forward to finish full-year bills. So the worth of this agreement will be proven by what comes next. And the only successful path forward requires the following. First, the majority must recognize reality, abide by the bipartisan budget agreement that accompanied the debt limit law. I think I'm one of the few in this institution who voted against the budget agreement. I was fearful of where we would be today, and it's where we are today. But I understand the law of the land. You pass it in the House, you pass it in the Senate, and the president signs it. It becomes the law of the land. They must abide by the bipartisan budget agreement that accompanied the debt limit law. That means a modest increase for defense programs and maintaining non-defense investment levels. It also means adhering to the same policy framework that we have adopted on a bipartisan, that's Democrats and Republicans, bicameral House and Senate basis. We have done this over and over and over again. That means no new poison pill riders. We've done this over and over and over and over again, just last December and the prior December. Second, the Appropriations Committee must be let loose to effectuate the agreement. And that means a good faith negotiation to set the allocations for all 12 bills. Chair Granger and I have done this before, and she knows that I am ready to get to work to do it again. In the Senate, Chair Murray and Ranking Member Senator Collins are already on a path to dealing with following the budget agreement. so that the four corners of appropriations, and so proud that we are all women, we get it. We're on track. We know how to do this. Lastly, we have to address the crises across the globe that threaten our allies, endangering our own national security. That means a promise to work in good faith to bring forward an emergency supplemental bill that deals with Ukraine, Israel, humanitarian needs, our influence in the Indo-Pacific, and to address border security. Why are we holding up the resources and investments to the American people? And why are we abdicating our leadership in the world community by not moving forward? And why, when the world is clamoring for humanitarian assistance, that the only people holding back humanitarian assistance in this entire Congress, on the House side and on the Senate side, are the Republican majority? Let us move forward. That is the only way that we avoid finding ourselves right back here in January and February considering another extension. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from Texas is recognized. Gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from
California,
California, the chairman of Defense Subcommittee, Mr. Calvert, for 3 minutes.
The gentlewoman yields. I recognize the gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of H.R. 6363, which will prevent a government shutdown. Over the past several months, House Republicans have been hard at work passing appropriation bills that cover over 75% of federal discretionary spending. We also passed a supplemental appropriations bill to support our ally, Israel. As the chairman of the Defense Subcommittee, I'm proud of our members' work to pass a bipartisan fiscal year 24 defense spending bill with high level of member input. However, the Senate has been unable to pass all their appropriation bills in a timely manner, and unfortunately this means we need more time to complete the FY24 appropriations process. H.R. 6363 extends current spending to January and February of next year. The split approach incentivizes the Senate to negotiate with us on all 12 bills. For our military, this bill ensures our troops continue their mission without fear of missing a paycheck. It also includes anomalies that keep the Columbia-class submarine, which is the top modernization priority of the Department of Defense, the United States Navy, on schedule. For those of us who have been in Congress for a shutdown, we've seen firsthand the damage it does to our military readiness. A shutdown would prevent any contract changes or new contracts for the entire Department of Defense. It would require active duty service members to report work without pay. It would close essential base services for military families. It would reduce training, and it would create a long list of other hardships for the United States military. As threats like China and Russia continue their provocation, we must avoid these failures at all costs. As an appropriator, I know how imperative it is that Congress carries out its constitutional responsibility and passes the 12 appropriation bills as soon as possible. I strongly urge support of this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back, and the gentlelady from Texas reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady from Connecticut for her leadership as former chair and ranking member, to my good friend from Texas as well. And I think they're completely accurate that left to their own devices, we could have an appropriations process that would work. But let me thank Chairwoman DeLauro for laying the groundwork of the crisis that we're now in. Let us be very clear. It's the Democrats that have come to save America and to stop this dastardly shutdown. As I've listened to the debate on the labor HHS, all I could see was the crushing of the American spirit, the eliminating of Gear Up and TRIO, the very programs that give a lifeline to young people across America, a stamping down of the greatest of our aspirations. And then having, over weeks ago, the President giving to us a supplemental for Ukraine and Israel and the border, and ensuring that we would be able to provide funding and to engage the way we should for defense. And now hearing that in the crisis we don't even have humanitarian aid that is needed in Gaza. All we're doing here is kicking the can, but thank goodness Democrats are able to say that we refuse to shut down the government. And it is because of the cities that are so desperately in need. How dare we put to our cities this catastrophe of having a government shutdown? In the state of Texas, why I'm here today to vote for this CR, 172,877 active duty and reserve personnel and their families would not be paid. That would impact the city of Houston. $2,742,702,800 funding to small business in Texas would not get that funding for small businesses creating jobs. They are the job engine of America, and Houston would be devastatingly impacted. 176 persons traveling through Bush Intercontinental Airport and our airports in Texas would face slowdowns because TSA would not be working. 786,686 people in Texas will lose access to their nutrition programs. Women, infant, and children denied food. Who are we in this country? That would be Houston, Texas. 168,413 federal workers in our city alone laid off. And 3,291,000 persons, 291,000 would not have the SNAP program to feed working families. This is shameful. But we're here today to ensure that government does not shut down and to make sure that even though it is not perfect, even though the bills that we're watching that Republicans say they're doing are literally taking the lifeline out of the hands of our fellow Americans, not doing border security, not providing humanitarian assistance that is needed. But yet, Democrats stood tall. We're going to fund this at FY23. We're not going to have draconian take away such as the taking away of reproductive rights. You have 15 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, I yield an additional 30 seconds to the gentleman.
I thank the gentlewoman. We will not have the denying of reproductive rights, discriminating against people because of their LGBTQ+, or discriminating against them because of race or of immigration, immigrant status. We won't have any of those draconian provisions in there. And thank God we will not have the cuts that we have seen that would hurt the American people, hurt Texans, hurt Houstonians. The CR is the right way right now because we have no other door. And it'll be Democrats that will save America, save our 50 states, save Texas, save our cities, save Houston. And I'm here today to ensure that we move forward so that we can do what is right by the American people. With that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back.
I reserve.
I recognize, I'm sorry, the gentlelady from Connecticut reserves. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Kentucky, the chairman of Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee, and Dean of the House of Representatives, Mr. Rogers, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding me this time. I rise today in strong support of the continuing resolution, with government funding set to expire on Friday. This legislation is necessary to ensure we avoid a harmful government shutdown. There is no other option. The bill before us extends government funding until either January 19th or February 2nd, depending on the agency. It also includes temporary extensions for critical expiring programs such as community health centers, the National Flood Insurance Program, and others, that are important to rural regions like Kentucky's 5th District. And on the heels of Veterans Day, it ensures that we continue providing critical resources to our military, defending America around the world, and takes care of our country's heroic veterans. While a CR is not my preferred method of conducting business, a government shutdown right before the holidays does our nation no good. We need more time to complete our fiscal 24 year, to give the House a better negotiating position with the Senate so we can eventually pass full-year appropriations bills. I strongly urge members to vote for this CR. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back. The gentlewoman from Texas reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
I continue to reserve. Reserve.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Tennessee, the chairman of the Energy and Water Subcommittee, Mr. Fleischman, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
I thank the chairwoman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 6363, the Further Continuing Appropriations Act. I applaud Speaker Johnson for his leadership in avoiding a harmful government shutdown, especially near the holidays. I also thank Chairwoman Granger for her work in putting together this clean continuing resolution. No one dislikes CRs more than Appropriations Committee. As chairman of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, I know the importance of enacting full-year bills to address issues like the nuclear weapons modernization programs at the Department of Energy and the navigation and flood and storm damage reduction projects of the Army Corps of Engineers. House Republicans all agree we need to get the federal government on a more fiscally responsible path. But lengthy government shutdowns don't save money. They actually cost more money. The CR will give us time to reach agreement on a top-line spending level and to negotiate final bills with the United States Senate. The two-step deadlines will also prevent a massive omnibus right before the holidays. A vote in favor of this continuing resolution is the only fiscally responsible vote. I urge my colleagues to support the bill, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Texas reserves.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
Who says I have the gentleman? Yes, go ahead. I yield to the gentleman from Ohio, the chairman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, Mr. Joyce, for 3 minutes.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the continuing resolution. Every member of this body has a duty to ensure that the core constitutional responsibilities of our government are funded. That work is not easy. Our Democrat colleagues will, of course, have different views on the top-line spending levels, and we will have to work through those sharp differences in spending and policy preferences. Republicans already passed 7 fiscal year 2024 bills through the House outlining our priorities. Each of those bills was considered individually and allowed members of both parties to offer amendments considered on the merits. Passing bills through regular order is not as clean or as easy as we'd like it to be, but it is a better alternative than one huge omnibus bill passed right before Christmas. There's no question about it. More work will be required to enact all 12 appropriation bills into law. The bill before us gives us the time necessary to agree on a top-line spending amount and negotiate difficult policy choices in the final fiscal year 2024 appropriation bills. I want to take this opportunity to thank the chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Granger, for her knowledge, her leadership, and tireless efforts to bring these appropriation bills to the floor, and I look forward to working alongside her as we finish the fiscal year 2024 spending bills. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Ohio yields. The gentlewoman from Texas reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman from Connecticut reserves. The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the chairman of Agriculture Subcommittee, Dr. Harris, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to support H.R. 6363, a bill that would keep the government operating while putting Congress on a path toward fiscal responsibility. We simply can't continue to pass large, bloated omnibus appropriations bills just before Christmas, and this bill is a new approach to break the cycle. Moody's changed the outlook of the nation's debt on Friday to negative. Rising interest rates from Bidenomics, the sharp increase in public debt, and a lack of agreement on measures to reduce the public deficit led to that downgrade. This should be a wake-up call for all of us. This bill gives us time to complete our work in a fiscally responsible manner while working toward a more normal appropriations process. Additionally, I'd like to specifically address concerns for funding of the WIC program. I've heard our colleagues on the other side of the aisle use scare tactics and a straw man that this bill does not provide enough funding for WIC in the states. We'll have to have a wait list for participants. Nothing could be further from the absolute truth. Let me remind everyone that provisions in the first CR continue in this bill, so the Department of Agriculture has the authority to maintain WIC participation, period. If states need more money, they should ask USDA for funding, not start wait lists. USDA and OMB have the authority to work together to fully fund the program, and if they don't, it's 100% the fault of the Biden administration. It's shameful that advocacy groups and the Biden administration's team use such scare tactics when they know full well they have the ability to fully fund WIC for the duration of this continuing resolution. I want to thank Speaker Johnson for his leadership in restoring fiscal restraint and supporting a new approach to control spending. I also want to thank Chairwoman Granger for her leadership and dedication in moving the FY24 House appropriations bills forward. The world has taken notice of the unsustainable spending and debt which undermine our credibility as a world leader. I strongly urge my colleagues to support H.R. 6363 to put us on the path to fiscal responsibility and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland yields. The gentlewoman from Texas reserves. The gentlewoman from Connecticut is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no further speakers, and I am prepared to close. But let me, I don't see Mr. Calvert on the floor. But Mr. Calvert, as you know, is the chair of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee and a very respected member and someone who cares deeply about our national security here at home and our international obligations and responsibilities. But I would just mention a couple of things in this context. As of this bill, $28 billion for the Department of Defense is held up until next February. And that's whether or not we can come to agreement. Next February, $28 billion to the Department of Defense. The other piece of this is that the State Foreign Ops Subcommittee of Appropriations and the Defense Subcommittee have shared responsibilities, and as you know from reading this laddered approach, that those two bills will not get to a continuing resolution until February 2nd. What do they do that has relevance in this period of time? Well, state foreign operations it's only a small amount of money, but they have a very small amount of money in which they can move humanitarian assistance in this global crisis that we have and the world clamoring for humanitarian assistance. Now, state foreign operations and defense share some other pieces, which have to do with funding for Ukraine and funding for Israel. So the $3.3 billion to Israel is held up until next February. And money for Ukraine, which we are depleted of, is nowhere to be found. So we walk off the international stage. We have abdicated a moral responsibility to Israel, to Ukraine, not unlike what happened in 1938 with appeasement, and to humanitarian assistance. And I want you to think about who is responsible for that. The other piece of this, which I think is very, very interesting, because we have seen the delay. There's been 5 months since we had the budget agreement in June. So 5 months of delay, another 45 days of delay. I don't understand, and I said a few moments ago, given what we've seen on the floor with regard to labor aid today, what is going to change in this next go-round? There are every opportunity for further delays. Further delays. What happens then is we move toward something called sequestration. And let me translate it into real terms. Those are across-the-board cuts in every single area, both domestic and international. That is what the law has done here. And there appears to be no understanding or no consideration for the movement of where we need to go. We have a history now of delay after delay after delay. And I don't see anything that portends a change in that activity or behavior. Final thing I would say is that with those across-the-board cuts, if all of the appropriations bills are not passed, not 8, not 4, if all 12 are not passed, and there's one hanging out there, that across-the-board cut comes crashing down on our heads. So I think people just need to know this information and fully understand. I don't want a government shutdown. I don't. But I want to fully understand what the stakes are. And I have to believe that every member of this body wants to know what the stakes are and what is actually in these bills. And finally, I would say is, and I'm going back to something I said earlier, who is holding up the resources that the American people are clamoring for, whether it's their health, whether it's their education, with their ability for a job. And every bill that we've seen on this floor curtails and cuts back in a remarkable way. And the Labor HH bill, you take us back to numbers in 2008, so that the resources that the American public needs to thrive, people in this country are living paycheck to paycheck, and we are doing nothing to deal with helping them with their cost of living. Nothing to deal with their cost of living. And I believe that they know that. So on the domestic front, we are shortchanging the American people. Let's get to the international scene. Who is holding up aid to Israel? Who is holding up funding the support for Ukraine? When did we believe that Vladimir Putin has noble intentions? He would gobble it up in a nanosecond. Who would believe, who was holding up humanitarian assistance? Our moral responsibility, watching children in Ukraine, in Israel, in Gaza, dying, and we don't have the strength to blow past this and say, let's do what we have been charged to do by this Constitution and carry out our duty. And I just say to you, House Republicans are holding up all of these critical security funding needs. Think about it. And think about how we should break a logjam with people who know better in this institution. Get us those top-line numbers. Get us the allocations. get the appropriations process on track, fund the bills for 2024. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentlewoman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields.